Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before you watch this walkthrough, make sure that you pause the video and try the problem yourself. Even a partial attempt will make the explanation that much more useful. These videos are meant to support your problem-solving process, not replace it. Across a lot of my practice problems, I highlight different aspects of how to approach, break down, and reason through problems. So you're going to get the best benefit by watching multiple walkthroughs rather than treating any single one of my videos as a template that you can copy. With that, let's get started. Today's practice problem is GradesReport. We're going to read a file, grades.txt, with lines like Alice space 87. There might be more than one person in the grades.txt file, however, no one will share a name. Compute the average grade for each of the people in the file. Computing the average grade, catching any parsing errors, so like invalid data, malformed lines, things like that, with a custom InvalidGradeException that will report the errored line. You can see an imaginary grades.txt import file right here with Alice and Shaheen with listed grades, as well as one line down here, Shaheen -1, being invalid because you can't have a grade of -1. You'll see that when the file got processed, the output was invalid grade on line Shaheen -1. So we got this invalid grade exception, and this is what happened. And then once the whole file finished processing, then we got those averages printing out down here. Shaheen's average was 99 because this line was not counted, right? Because it was invalid, so it was just the 1. We have some assumptions we have to make here, but there's a lot we can infer from this example output, being that clearly everything gets processed with the exceptions being thrown as they come up. We only print out the average once at the very end once we've finished processing. And that all we care about printing out is that average grade at the end. So it's across however many times we read people's data in. Alice had 2 valid pieces of data. Those were summed up and divided by 2. Shaheen's 1 valid piece of data was divided by 1, and that's what printed out here as well. This is enough information for us to get started. So let's flip over and check it out. I've already created a grades.txt file with Alice, Bob, and Charlie, just so that we have a starting place to work from. The one thing that this practice problem didn't tell us is the maximum number of individuals that might be loaded in, and we will need that at least for my attempt at a solution. So I'm going to tell you that there are no more than 100 possible students. All right. No more than 100 possible students. Just going to write that down so that we don't forget. Get our main.java. Now in our main.java, we know we need a public class main. And we can start by just writing out some more information that we know. We need to read in grades.txt. We know that lines should have a name and a 0 to 100 double value because they're grade percentages. Should being the operative word there, of course. We understand that if something goes wrong on a line, we should throw an invalid grade exception. We also know that when we are done reading the file, we should print averages. All right. This is a lot of information. We have to figure out how exactly we're going to get started. Step 1 needs to be that we are reading in that grades.txt file, and we should understand that we will have no more than 100 possible students. Since we are talking about students here, I am going to make another file that is going to keep track of all of my students. Let's go ahead and make a public class student list file. Now my student list file here, studentlist.java, is going to have a final static int, max num students, as we said, being 100. We're also going to have a private int cur size, I guess we'll just call it size, and we're going to need a private student array of student data. Now this is going to be important because, of course, when we have our public student list constructor, We can set our size variable to be 0 since there's no students in here yet, and set our student data equal to a new student array of size max num students. Now we're going to use this partially filled array class to keep track of things like adding information to individual students. Now we don't have a student class yet, but I do need one. And I'm going to just, for the sake of seeing other ways to solve problems, create this student class internal right here. We'll just make a student class right here. This internal student class can have a private string name, a private int numGrades, and a private int sumGrades. Now this is really important because we should understand that, as we said, we understand that we just need to print averages out, right? We don't need to print not individual grades. So there's no reason for us to store the individual grades anywhere once they've been read in. That's sort of how I'm making that assumption. I understand that really I just need something to keep adding up a student's grade and the number of grades as well. So what can we do here in this program? We're going to need our public student constructor. And I think it's reasonable to pass in the name to get started. And just kind of starting there. Then we can start our sumGrades at 0. This should actually be a double because we did say double previously. And we should say that our number of grades is also going to be 0 to begin. Now, what are things we can do with a student? Well, we can increase their sum and num grades. So every time we find student information that is associated with a given student, we need some way to increase these values. I'm going to add a method here, public add student grade data, that is going to take in some new grade to add for that student. Every time we have a new grade to add, we can add it to our sumGrades variable, like that. And we should also be increasing our number of grades variable because we did indeed include another grade there. Perfect. I have two more things that I'm probably going to be able to do in here. The first, this should be public void, apologies. The first is I need some way to actually calculate my average. So we're going to have a getAverage variable or method. And this instance method should just return our sum of our grades divided by the number of grades that we have read in. It makes sense for a student to calculate their own average because they're the one who has the information regarding that average value. The last thing that's always nice for us to have is a toString. I'm just going to add it right here at the bottom. It's not going to be a fancy toString. Name. Actually, given the output that's expected, I can just do this.name and then a space. And then, actually, with this being a double, I'll do string.format. We'll do their name. And then we'll do like up to 2 decimal places for the decimal value. And then we can do this.name and this.getAverage. There we go. So that will get the student's name and place it there. And then it will call the getAverage method, get the average calculation, and plop that in right there. Can't remember if that's supposed to be an F or a D. I think it's an F since we're dealing with doubles. It's a D if we're dealing with integers. Okay. So now we have a fully functional student class. This student class does live inside the student list. So in theory, we don't want to give access outside of student lists to this class. We could make this private in order to do so. The last thing worth noting is a reminder that if we try to call getAverage without any grades being added, this could blow up because numGrades is 0. So it might be worth adding some kind of stipulation here that says if this.numGrades is greater than 0, we can do our average calculation. Average will be equal to that. Otherwise, just don't do it. So this will just sort of ensure that it won't blow up because numGrades is 0 and we can't do division by 0. If we have 0 grades, the average should be 0. So simple enough just to avoid divide by 0 errors. Okay, so now this is our private class student that lives internal, and now we can make some meaningful updates to this student list along with actually processing our file. We're going to be flipping back and forth a fair bit here in order to do this effectively. Now in our main, we're going to have a final string, input file, and we'll call it grades.txt right there. And similarly to our previous videos, we will make some functions. Read in the file, and maybe this should read and return the student list, and then print out the processed student list. So we have two functions that we're going to try and work with here. Okay, function 1, student list SL is going to be process file, and we'll pass in that input file. Let's start with that. Let's go ahead and make that function. Public static student list process file string file name. And we're going to do this just like we did before. This time though, I will do buffered reader and file reader just to do something different from my previous video. Buffered reader BR is going to be equal to a new, buffered reader. We need to pass in a new file reader. And here we'll pass in the file name. Now, a reminder that buffered reader does actually throw an IO exception. So this needs to catch IO exceptions in general. And this includes the file not found exceptions. So we can just say ioe.print stack trace, and this will cover us for any buffered reader concerns regarding the file. We're going to need a new student list, and we can set it to be a new student list right here, and we can return it at the end. Now is always a good time to compile and make sure we're not missing anything, because right now we are missing stuff. So a reminder that we should always be compiling our code any chance we get, really. And now we're going to notice that we are missing quite a few things. First thing here says in my student list Java 33, I've got something weird going on. Get average, return average is struggling to be correct. And what an unhelpful error message telling me it's the illegal start of type return average, when in reality the issue is I'm missing a bracket here. That wasn't the most helpful error message, but I could tell that that's what was going on because I went one line up since this was the illegal start of type. And when I did that without this here, I could tell that this is actually showing as closing right here, and that's incorrect. So just pop that in there. Let's try again. Now we're getting the errors I was expecting to see. We're not actually able to find these classes. The file reader class throws IO exception, and I'm not bringing it in. I'm not bringing in the class buffered reader. I'm not bringing in the class filed reader. There's a lot of errors here, and they're all related to my missing import statements. So since I know that these all live in Java IO, I'll just bring that whole library in all at once. That'll fix all my errors, as we can see. Now, once I've opened the file, I'm not actually doing anything with it yet, right? This right now just returns an empty file because I'm not actually doing anything with it here inside process file. I have opened it, but I'm still not using it for anything. So we can go ahead and say, while the string line is equal to br.readLine, that's the function. And if you don't know the functions, you can always go looking for them, as I've said before, in the Java documentation. While it's not null, This can be done in 2 lines, but it's not necessary here. It works very nicely just to do it all in one while loop line. It's not the greatest programming standards, but it's okay. What do we want to do? What does it mean to read in a line and do something with it? Well, for each line, what is it that we want to do? We need to split it into tokens. We need to make sure it has a name and a valid grade. And once we've done that, we need to add the name and their grade to the student list. Those are the 3 things that we need to do for each of our lines. So we can even just move this for each line out since that is our while loop. But now we need to split onto our different tokens. So let's do our string tokens, line.split. Just as we learned in the previous video, use our any number of spaces split right here. All right. Now we need to make sure that it has a name and a valid grade. So our first check here needs to be if tokens is equal to 2. As long as it has both a name and a valid grade, we should be good. Now there are a few different ways to sort of work this out, but what I'm going to actually say is if the length is not true, if the length is not equal to 2, I'm going to go ahead and throw that invalid grade exception. Now, to throw that exception, I'm going to actually have to go make that exception somewhere. So I will need a new class file. Public class invalid grade exception. Now, there are a few different ways to implement this. The simplest way for us right now, this is an advanced topic, not something you'll necessarily be doing in the course I'm recording this for, is to say extends exception, invalid grade exception .java. And then according to the description of the question, it should report invalid grade on line and then show off the line. So in order to do that, we need to set our constructor, passing in our message, and we're going to go ahead and do so like this. We'll say invalid grade on line, and then we're going to pass in that message. You don't need to understand what all of this means because, like I said, it's going to be sort of advanced for this class. Just understand that I've created an invalid grade exception and that I can pass in the line that something is going wrong on, and we're going to be able to print out our own exception. That's the only real takeaway at this point. So now I can throw a new invalid grade exception and pass in the line that this exception is happening on. So we are going to try to split up this line. And if we have a problem, we will catch the thrown invalid grade exception right here. And we can go ahead and just print out that message that we just set internally. IGE.getMessage, it will get the message that we've appropriately set. That's all we need to do. We're going to continue processing after that. So in this instance, we are allowed to just print out the fact that an exception occurred and then move on to the next line in the file. We don't need this to end the whole program. Including the try-catch internal to the while loop allows for that to be the case. So if we don't have exactly 2 tokens, this is what's going to happen. Next, we need to make sure that we have a valid name and grade. There isn't a lot to the name. We can assume that the very first token is going to be the name. That's fine. But we do need to make sure that the second token is a valid grade. We have 2 different checks that we have to do here. The first is we have to try. Actually, we can do this without writing try. We can just go ahead and try and get the grade like this. Double.parse double on tokens at 1. If this goes wrong for any reason, we're going to get some kind of invalid input error. If you don't know what this parse double returns, we can go and look it up in the Java Oracle documentation. Java Oracle. We can go right into that double class. We can go find that parse double method, and we can see that when we click on it, if the string does not contain a parsable double, we'll get a number format exception. That's the important piece here. We can pick up that name and add another catch here. We can catch that number format exception and similarly translate it into the correct type of exception we want, which might mean actually putting it right there. And then here we can throw a new invalid grade exception on our line. So once again, if something goes awry here in our parse double, we'll throw a number format exception because that's what parse double throws. We'll catch that number format exception right here and internally throw a new invalid grade exception, which will then get caught right here. And then this one will go ahead and print it out, and we can pass that message along. Providing we get past all of those concerns, we can now go into our student list, as we said. I guess the last thing we'll need to do is make sure that the grade is greater than or equal to 0, and the grade needs to be less than or equal to 100, right? If it's not, we have to say, once again, an invalid grade error. So what I'll do is I'll flip this. I'll say if it's less than 0 or if it's greater than 100, we can do one more throw invalid grade exception. So this one makes sure that our grade is not negative or greater than 100. Whoops. This check right here makes sure the grade is a double. And this one right here makes sure we have the 2 expected tokens on the line. We can sort of see how each of these different situations have played out and why we may need to throw an exception in a few different places or catch different types before we throw them again. Okay, if we've made it past all of these, now we can go grab that student list and actually add our new student to it. List.add grade information. We can pass in the name and pass in the grade, right? That's this one right here. And at this point, we can make sure that we have all the correct information that we needed for that student and that information. We don't have this method yet. We will go make it shortly. Just want to make sure that that's otherwise all done. So now let me just even zoom out because this is quite large. We can see that we make our new student list. We read in our file. For each line in our file, we split up the tokens. We make sure we have the correct number of tokens. We make sure that it's a double there. We make sure that that double is valid. And once we have passed all of those checks, we can add the grade information. And this all happens within that while loop. You'll notice there are 2 different types of catches because in different scenarios, we need to catch invalid grade exceptions or that parsing exception and appropriately handle them as per the expected output from the question. Once all of our lines have been processed, we can go ahead and return our list. Don't forget this outer catch that was specific to the buffered reader scenario. All right, once we're done, we'll return our list. Once we've done that, we'll be able to print student data. So we are now missing 2 functions. We're missing the student list print student data function and the list.add grade information function. If I recompile my code, I should get those 2 compilation errors, but that's all I should get. Oh, these are all 4 related to this one line. I was close. I needed to have defined my string line here, and then I can just make it equal in here. Whoops, let's try this one more time. Do I still have my 2 errors? I do. And are they related to the 2 methods, 1 and 2? They are. Fantastic. So now I have a main method that is compiling as I'd expect, and the comments outline what I'm expecting to happen. And now I'm going to flip over to my student list and get these 2 methods in there. Print student data will go right there. And the other method will be that public void add grade information, taking in a name and a grade. My code is really nicely segmented into lots of methods and classes, and this is on purpose because it is making it a lot easier for me to sort of just work on little tidbits at a time. When it comes to printing student data, ultimately, what do I want to, oh, I put these in the wrong place. These need to go inside my student list, not inside my student class. Here's my student class. I'll just collapse it for a sec. There we go. Because what do I actually want to print inside my student data should be based on the original question. Just this list here of students and their averages, students and their averages. So it should be as simple as saying for int I is equal to 0, I is less than size, I++, print out student data at I. And then each student has its own toString, which outlines the information I would expect right there. So that should be as simple as I need for that method. Now, add grade information is a little bit trickier because add grade information means making sure the student doesn't already exist. If they exist, add their grade to the student. And if they don't exist, make a new student and add their grade. So we have some information here that we have to sort of work with. It's not quite as simple as just adding the information to the student data array here. So first things first, we have to first see if the student already exists. If the student exists, what did we say we're going to do? Add grade to student. Otherwise, create new student. And checking that a student exists is a function in of itself. So I think what I'll do is I'll create a new function that returns an index. Exists. And if that index is greater than or equal to 0, they already exist. Otherwise, they'll be a new student. Just like an index of might work. Maybe I should even name it that. Index of. There we go. So I'm going to make this index of function so that I can go through my student array and see if that person already exists. Now, this is a method I am only calling inside my private student list class, so it should be a private method. Private int index of string name. Now what I need to do is I need to determine whether or not this student already exists. So for each student in my list, I is less than the size, I++. If I go into a given student in student data, if student data at I dot name dot equals, ignore case, the same as the name that's coming in, my index is I. And then we can return our index at the end. A couple things to note here. I might be able to break out early once I find their name. I could do this. I could break out early, but break isn't great programming standards. So instead, I'm just going to let it finish running because there's 100 students maximum. That's really not that high, so it's fine if it goes a little bit longer. You'll also notice that I can reference the .name directly, even though my variable is private. This should still work because this is a nested class inside this class. So I have access to everything that exists, like student list has access to everything inside of its parentheses, and this student class is inside its parentheses. A reminder that we said that the names are unique, and so we shouldn't care about casing. I've got my equals ignore case for that situation. Now I can go right back up here. If my index greater than or equal to 0, meaning they already exist inside my student data list, I can go ahead and what did we call the function? Add student grade data to that student and add their grade. Perfect. Otherwise, we need to create a brand new student. So in that scenario, we need to go ahead and grab our student data at size. We need to create a new student that takes in their name. Once that's done, we need to go to our student data at size dot add student grade data, passing in that grade, and then we can do our size plus. This ensures that we have our new student added so that the next time their name comes up, they'll already be in the list. All right, let's take a look. There's a lot of code here, and normally I do more testing as I go, but here we are. Let's see. I'm sure I'll have at least some things to fix here. Oh, I really thought it was going to be okay with that. Okay, perhaps not. Instead of adding this separate catch here, what we'll do, there we go, is around this double here, we'll just try this parse right there. We'll catch our number format exception and throw our invalid grade exception right there. Now when it throws it here, we'll be able to catch it right here. I thought that was going to work, but I guess not. That's all right. All right, let's go and see where our other errors are here. We've got a few. Right here we see that we cannot find this value grade in main 37. Here's grade, and that's because I've now put this inside of a try, which is going to make this cause a problem. So instead I need to start this off up here because of scoping issues as double grade equals 0. We'll try to get a real value. If we can't get a real value, we can leave this now as 0. If I recompile, I've solved all my problems. So just to recap, what I've done is when I readjusted my catch structure so that I would catch the number format exception right here, I put a try around this parsing. So I'm trying to parse, I'm catching the number format exception, and then I'm rethrowing an error. I'm throwing a new exception, the invalid grade exception, which can now be caught here. By putting this parsing line inside of try brackets, we are now changing the scope of that grade variable. This means I had to actually make the grade variable up here, so I declared grade on line 31 so that the Java compiler no longer complains. There is an alternative actually, which is to put all of it in here. We can try to do this parsing and then continue on. If we do that, we no longer need to declare it out here. It's just one of those things that you have to watch your scope of your variables and consider how those parentheses are working. I can recompile this and this should still work just fine. All right, those are the changes I've now made. So what am I expecting my output to be? Well, for grades.txt, I'm not expecting any exceptions to be thrown. These are all completely valid data points. So I am expecting an output of a line for Alice, a line for Bob, and a line for Charlie, each with the values calculated appropriately. We have Alice with 87 and 90 as her grades. So if we want, we can just go here and do 87 plus 90, divide it by 2, and say we expect to see Alice 88.5. We can go and check out that Bob is 92 and 88. So same thing, let's do 92 plus 88. And when we divide that by 2, we're expecting Bob to have an average of 90, and then Charlie has a 78 and an 82. So last thing, 72 plus, what was it? 78 plus 82 divided by 2 means an average of 80. 78. Didn't mean to delete that. All right, let's go ahead and run this main method and see if we appropriately read in our file, create our student list, fill it up, and process this file. As we can see, we absolutely did. Alice has her 88.5, Bob has 90, and Charlie has 80. So we are successfully validating a happy path file. Everything worked. The last thing to check now is this grades1.txt file, where we're going to have doubles that aren't really doubles, where we're going to have negative values, where we're going to have over 100 values, where we're going to be missing data on a line, where we're going to be having too many words on a given line right here, right? So let's go and make sure that our different exception cases also work. We now need to go back to main and change our grades.txt to be grades1.txt, since that's where all of those different line items are. And now, since we changed a Java file, we do need to recompile. And we can see that we have our invalid grade being thrown on Fatima 80, Charlie -5, Hannah 105, Jasmine with no additional information, George 77 as a string, and Jasmine 90 with extra data that we didn't want to be able to read in. And everybody else's grades are still coming out as expected. Now, it would be very wise to double check that like Fatima 86 is correct with the fact that we're still ignoring this line 80. So if we go in here and look for all the places where Fatima's name is, we'll see that Fatima only appears one other time, right there with 86, which means 86 divided by 1 still did give us 86. We could check all of them, but a litmus test works just as well. Making sure 1 or 2 work is pretty safe. That's it, and now we've solved this problem. Now remember, you won't find my solution posted alongside this video. If you watch the walkthrough without first attempting the problem, stop here, close my solution, and try to write it yourself now. Post-walkthrough practice still counts. If you have questions about this problem or suggestions for future practice videos, please be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.